The fine showed up in my mailbox like a slap in the face, bright red envelope, bold letters. Urgent HOA violation, $10,000 fine. I stood dumbfounded on my front porch, flipping the letter over like maybe there was a punchline on the back. There wasn't. Just the same smug HOA logo and a signature that made my blood boil. Marlene Lancaster, HOA Chair. I'm Weston Nichols, 42, a contractor by trade and a homeowner in the Maplewood Ridge Estates for the last 7 years. I built my pool last spring with permits, surveys, and every inch of paperwork in place. I was proud of it. It was my little slice of sanity after long days on dusty job sites. I even landscaped it myself. So when I saw the accusation unauthorized structure encroaching on HOA common space, I nearly laughed. But it wasn't funny. $10,000, that's not a typo. $10,000. I marched straight to the monthly HOA meeting that evening, letter in hand. Everyone was sitting in the community clubhouse, acting like it was bingo night, sipping lukewarm coffee and pretending they weren't about to rob their neighbor's blind. Marlene sat at the head table, her platinum blonde bob hair sprayed to death, tapping her pen like she owned the world. "Mr. Nichols," she said without looking up, "we received a complaint that your pool extends past the property line. We had our inspector confirm it." I raised an eyebrow. "Your inspector? Who was that exactly?" Marlene didn't answer. Instead, she gestured to some grainy printout photos clearly taken from behind my backyard fence. "You've built into the HOA green zone. That's a violation. We've issued the fine accordingly." I scanned the photos. "You took these from Miss Dempsey's backyard?" I asked, pointing to the angle. "You're trespassing now, too?" That got a few murmurs from the crowd. Marlene leaned forward. "We're not here to debate your theories. The fine is final." "No, Marlene," I said, unfolding the copy of the original land survey I'd brought with me. "It's not final because you're wrong." She blinked. "Excuse me. I had the land surveyed when I bought the house, and again when I built the pool. Here's the certified report showing the property line," I said, holding it up. "And guess what? My pool is 3 feet inside my boundary." Marlene's jaw tightened, but she tried to recover. "Well, our HOA inspector, your so-called inspector, isn't licensed," I cut in. "But you know who is. The county surveyor who signed this, and I've got the permits too. Want to see those?" The room was dead quiet now. A couple of board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One actually cleared his throat like he wanted to speak, but Marlene shot him a look that could peel paint. "You sent me a $10,000 fine based on illegal surveillance and a made-up inspection. That's fraud, Marlene." Her eyes narrowed. "You're out of line." I stepped forward. "No, you are, and I'm not paying a cent." And that's when I noticed her hand twitch toward the folder beside her. Something was in there she didn't want anyone to see, so I made a plan. If these people were going to play dirty, I was going to get cleaner, smarter, and louder. I didn't go home after the meeting. Instead, I drove straight to the county records office. I knew I'd need more than just a printout and my word to shut this thing down for good. If Marlene was doubling down after being shown a certified survey, then whatever she was hiding in that folder wasn't just about my pool. The clerk behind the counter raised an eyebrow when I asked for property and zoning records for the entire Maplewood Ridge Estates, but I told him I was investigating a potential boundary discrepancy. That was true enough. An hour later, I walked out with a stack of maps, easement documents, and something I hadn't expected. A copy of a proposed Greenbelt expansion plan from 8 years ago that was never approved. That changed everything. Back home, I spread the documents across my kitchen counter. The so-called common space Marlene claimed my pool encroached on. It didn't exist, not legally. It had been a proposed revision to the neighborhood plan that was denied by the county due to lack of environmental review, but someone had drawn it into the HOA's internal maps anyway. That meant their claim wasn't just weak, it was based on fabricated boundaries. The next morning, I called an attorney. Not just any attorney. My sister-in-law, Dana, was a real estate lawyer who'd spent the last decade dismantling fraudulent zoning cases for a living. I hadn't wanted to drag her into neighborhood nonsense, but this wasn't nonsense anymore. This was fraud disguised as bureaucracy. We met that afternoon in her office downtown. She flipped through the documents I brought, tapping her pen against her pad as she read. "Where did you get these?" she asked, narrowing her eyes at the Greenbelt proposal, county records. "Then this," she held up the fake easement map from the HOA handbook, "is a felony." I leaned back in the chair. "They're using it to issue fines." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she picked up her phone and dialed her partner, a guy named Greg who handled municipal fraud cases. Within 10 minutes, they were drafting a formal complaint to the district attorney's office. "The good news," Dana said, "is that if they used a falsified map to collect funds or intimidate homeowners, that's wire fraud. If they opened the HOA's account based on these maps, that's bank fraud. If they used that money for anything personal, that's embezzlement." "I just wanted to swim in peace," I muttered. Dana looked up. "Well, now we're going to drown them in paperwork instead." That night, I installed 2 new outdoor cameras. Not just for security, though I wouldn't have been surprised if someone tried to sabotage the pool by accident. I wanted every angle covered in case anyone from the board decided to retaliate. It only took 3 days for the retaliation to start. A bright orange notice was zip-tied to my front gate when I got home from work. "Immediate cease and desist unapproved structure." Beneath it was a threat to turn off my water service if I didn't comply. I laughed out loud. The HOA didn't control utilities. The next morning, I walked into the city's Department of Public Works and showed them the notice. The clerk rolled her eyes before I even finished. "We've had 4 of these this month," she said, pulling out a folder. "Same HOA, same fake letterhead, we've already flagged them. They don't have any authority over municipal services." "Can I get that in writing?" She smiled and handed me a signed affidavit. "Already prepared." I scanned it and emailed it directly to Dana. Within the hour, she added it to the complaint packet. The DA's office called her later that day requesting a meeting. Meanwhile, I kept digging. I wasn't the only target. I started knocking on doors quietly. I wasn't trying to start a riot, just gather facts. Out of the 24 homes in our section of the neighborhood, 8 other owners had received similar fines in the past year. Every single one was over a supposed boundary violation. None had been provided with legitimate surveys. Most had just paid the fines out of fear. That's when I met Bryn and Marcus, an older couple 2 streets over. They invited me in and showed me their fine, a whopping $12,000 for a patio they'd had since moving in. Marcus had Parkinson's, and they'd paid the fine to avoid further stress, as they put it. What got me was the receipt. It wasn't from the HOA's account. It was deposited into a separate fund labeled Maplewood Beautification Initiative. That name didn't exist in any of the HOA's official filings. I took photos of everything. One of the neighbors I interviewed, a retired fire marshal named Hector, had an old fire access map of the neighborhood from when the community was first built. He pulled it from a filing cabinet in his garage and unfolded it on his workbench. "You see this?" He pointed to a shaded area labeled Emergency Access Easement right where the supposed greenbelt sat. "They can't build anything here, can't fine anyone for using it either." So not only was my pool not in violation, the land they were claiming wasn't even theirs to police. That night, I drafted a letter and hand-delivered it to every house in the neighborhood. It included copies of the real maps, a summary of the fraudulent fines, and an invitation to a community meeting at the local library. I booked the room under homeowners for legal transparency. 32 people came. Dana joined via Zoom, and Greg from the DA's office sent a formal statement confirming an investigation was underway. I saw a few jaws drop when I read that out loud. Marlene didn't show, of course. But 2 board members did, Tom and Evelyn. They sat in the back, quiet at first, until I brought up the bank records. I have evidence that fines were deposited into a private account not linked to the HOA, I said. That's not just unethical, it's criminal. Evelyn stood up. I didn't know that's where the money was going. Marlene said it was a temporary fund until the renovation budget passed. Did you authorize it in the board minutes? She hesitated. Tom stared at the floor. No, she admitted. Then I dropped the final bombshell. The HOA's insurance policy doesn't cover criminal acts. If this goes to court, and it will, you could be held personally liable. Tom finally looked up. We want to help fix this. I nodded. Then start by freezing that account. The next morning, the HOA's website went down. A notice appeared on the clubhouse door. Board meeting canceled until further notice. 2 days later, a detective from the Financial Crimes Unit knocked on my door. He had a warrant and a list of names. I understand you've been collecting evidence, he said. I handed him a flash drive. Everything you need's on there, and I've got backups, he nodded. You're not the first to report this, but you're the first with documentation that holds up. I watched him leave, feeling something shift in the air, not victory exactly, but momentum. Marlene had built an empire of fear and confusion, but now the walls were crumbling one affidavit, one photograph, one conversation at a time, and I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The detective's visit stirred up more than just curiosity in the neighborhood, it ignited something close to rebellion. The morning after he left with my flash drive, a few neighbors who had stayed silent until now began showing up at my front door. First was a single mother named Tanya from the East cul-de-sac, holding a manila envelope like it contained plutonium. I didn't want to get involved, she said, eyes darting around, but after what you uncovered, I remembered something. She handed me the envelope. Inside were photocopies of checks, 7 of them, made out to Maplewood Beautification Initiative, the fake fund name that had come up before. One check had a post-it stuck to it, scribbled in nervous handwriting, asked for a receipt. Never got one. Did you ever ask what the money was for? I asked. Tanya nodded. They said my front walkway violated new aesthetic codes. I didn't even know we had new codes. We didn't. I knew that already. But now I had proof that they'd been inventing violations and laundering payments through a shell account. Tanya wasn't the only one. Within 24 hours, I had documents from 5 more homeowners, each one showing irregularities, fees with no receipts, notices signed by board members who had apparently never seen them. And in one case, a lien filed against a property without any court filing behind it. I started compiling everything into a timeline: violations, notices, payments, and the fake Greenbelt map's first appearance. It all traced back to one date, July 3rd, 2 years ago. That's when Marlene had taken over as chair following a sudden resignation by the previous board president. No one had seen or heard from that man since. I tracked him down. His name was Dennis O'Malley, and he now lived 2 counties over. I found him listed as a licensed electrician and called his business number. When I explained who I was and what I was investigating, he went quiet. "You're telling me they're still using that map," he said finally, so I drove out to meet him. We sat in a diner off I-75 and he slid a battered folder across the table. Inside were drafts of the original HOA handbook revisions, ones he had rejected before stepping down. One page was especially revealing. A proposed beautification plan that included a new fee structure and a community improvement fund. It had been denied in a board vote. But the next month, those exact fees started appearing on residents' mailboxes under different names. "They railroaded me," Dennis said. "Told me I was holding the neighborhood back. I didn't want to deal with the threats." "What kind of threats?" He hesitated. Then he pulled out a photo, his car windshield smashed in his driveway, no suspects, no witnesses. Just a note under the wiper. "Keep blocking progress and you'll be next." I took the folder and thanked him. On the drive back, I called Dana again. She was already working with the DA's office, but when I mentioned the intimidation tactics and the fake lien, she went quiet for a moment. "Weston," she said, This might be bigger than HOA fraud. If they filed a false lien with forged documents, that's a felony. And if they threatened a public official or used intimidation to seize funds, we're looking at racketeering. 3 days later, prosecutors filed a motion to subpoena the HOA's financial records. They served it the same morning the board was scheduled to meet in what they called a special executive session. I showed up anyway. Even though it was supposedly closed to the public, the clubhouse door was unlocked. I walked in just as Marlene was mid-sentence. "We'll transfer the funds out of the initiative account," before she stopped when she saw me. Her face tightened. "You have no right to be here," she said. "Actually, I do," I replied, holding up a letter from the DA's office designating me as a cooperating witness. "And so does he." The detective from Financial Crimes stepped in behind me. His badge was visible. The room fell into stunned silence. "We have a warrant for the HOA's financial records, including the Maplewood Beautification Initiative Fund and all related ledgers," he said. "Please step away from the files." Marlene didn't move. Neither did the treasurer, a guy named Victor who always wore loafers with no socks and acted like he was doing everyone a favor just by existing. "Those are private documents," Victor said. The detective didn't flinch. "They're evidence." Evelyn, the board member who had attended our library meeting, stood up and walked away from the table. Her face was pale. "I want it on record that I never had access to that account," she said, "and I want immunity." That opened the floodgates. Tom followed. "Same here." Marlene handled all the transfers. We just signed what she gave us. The detective nodded and began collecting the files. Marlene tried to walk out, but 2 uniformed officers stopped her at the door. "You can't arrest me for running a neighborhood," she snapped. "No," the detective said, "but we can arrest you for wire fraud, forgery, and obstruction of a financial investigation, among other things." They cuffed her right there. Victor, too. The shock on the faces of the homeowners who had gathered outside was something I'll never forget. A few started clapping. One woman actually cried with Marlene gone. The rest of the board resigned within the week. A temporary oversight committee was formed, and I was asked to help organize new elections. I declined the offer. I'd had enough of meetings and minutes, but I did agree to help draft a new set of bylaws with legal oversight and open audits. The funniest part: the pool stayed exactly where it was. No one ever questioned it again. The county surveyor even sent a formal letter confirming the property line, which I had framed and hung in my garage not out of pride, but as a reminder that the truth, when documented and persistent, can outlast anything, even a power-hungry HOA with a fake map and a $10,000 scam. A month later, Tanya hosted a block party, the first one in years. No one worried about fines or citations. Kids chalked the sidewalks, people grilled out on driveways. Hector brought his fire map and gave a hilarious toast about easements and barbecue rights. The neighborhood felt like a community again, not a fiefdom. As for the charges, Marlene and Victor were indicted on 12 counts, including embezzlement, wire fraud, and filing false instruments. Evelyn and Tom testified under immunity. The DA called it one of the most brazen abuses of HOA authority in state history. I called it closure. Justice didn't just knock on the door, it walked through it, with a badge and a warrant, and I never paid a single cent of that $10,000 fine. 2 weeks after the arrests, the newly formed Oversight Committee held its first open forum in the high school auditorium. Folding chairs filled the room, and for the first time since I moved into Maplewood Ridge Estates, there were no clipped voices, no passive-aggressive glares, no watchful eyes cataloging who trimmed their hedges too short. People actually laughed, not nervously, genuinely. Dana stood beside me near the front, holding a binder thick with affidavits and exhibits. She hadn't just helped me navigate the legal storm, she'd turned it into a full-blown expose. The DA's office had already transferred the case to the White-Collar Crimes Division, and the judge had approved restitution hearings for all the impacted homeowners. This is going to be a landmark case, Dana said, leafing through the binder. HOAs across the state are watching this like it's a live crime drama. I folded my arms and scanned the room. They should be. The microphone squealed once before the new interim committee chair, a quiet man named Bernard Ng, approached the podium. He ran the local hardware store. No political ambitions, no interest in controlling anyone. His only campaign promise had been transparency and no nonsense. We've received authorization from the court to begin reimbursing residents from the seized funds, Bernard began, adjusting his glasses. All previous citations issued by the former board are officially void. That got a small wave of applause. I glanced at Tanya in the second row. She was holding hands with her daughter, who looked more relaxed than I'd ever seen her in public. Bernard continued. We're also working with county officials to identify any structural changes made based on fraudulent mandates. If you removed a tree, repainted your house, or tore down a fence under duress from the previous board, we'll be facilitating compensation and approvals to restore your property at no cost to you. Dana leaned toward me. That clause was my idea, I chuckled. Of course it was. Then Bernard said something that caught everyone off guard. The district attorney's office has confirmed the existence of a secondary bank account used to funnel over $87,000 in unauthorized fines. That account was tied not just to one individual, but to a network of vendors, contractors, and even a title company that received kickbacks for processing false liens. Gasps rippled through the crowd. One man stood up in the back and asked, "Are you saying this was bigger than just Marlene and Victor?" Bernard nodded. Much bigger. Dana stepped forward and asked to speak. Bernard handed her the mic. Based on our investigation, she said, we found that several of the companies used by the former board weren't real businesses. They were shell entities registered to P.O. boxes in another county. Funds paid by homeowners were funneled through these companies and then withdrawn in cash. That's not mismanagement, that's criminal conspiracy. A woman near the aisle looked stunned. How'd they pull that off without anyone noticing? They relied on fear, isolation, and silence, Dana replied. But that ends now. The next day, I was contacted by the Assistant Attorney General. They wanted a statement, one that could be used in a broader civil suit the state was preparing against the involved title company. I agreed, and 3 days later, I sat in a government office beneath the seal of the state, recounting every detail, from the first fine to the final board meeting. By then, the property management company that had partnered with the HOA had issued a statement claiming they were unaware of the misappropriations. But records showed they'd received increased administrative payments during the time the fake fines were being levied. The state began proceedings to revoke their license. Meanwhile, restitution checks started arriving. Tanya got hers first nearly double what she had paid, thanks to a state-mandated penalty clause for fraudulent collection. Bryn and Marcus received compensation not only for their fine, but for emotional distress, after documentation surfaced showing they had been targeted specifically for being uncooperative with aesthetic mandates language found in a private email exchange between former board members. I didn't want money, not really. But I cashed the check anyway and used it to build a small outdoor kitchen next to the pool. Just to make the point, one afternoon I was in my garage when Hector walked up, holding a folded sheet of paper. City voted to rename the Greenbelt, he said, handing it to me. The printout showed an approval notice. The new name, O'Malley Commons, after the former board president who'd been forced out for refusing to go along with the fraud. The land would remain undeveloped, a protected easement with a new walking path and community garden. I nodded. That's fitting, Hector chuckled. They're also talking about adding a plaque. Let me guess. It'll say don't mess with contractors and their permits, he laughed louder. Something like that. A few days later, the trials began. Victor's attorney tried to argue that he was merely following orders. but the prosecution had dozens of emails contradicting that claims, several with him explicitly instructing the treasurer to keep it off the books. Marlene, on the other hand, maintained that it was all part of a misunderstood improvement plan. But the fake maps, the altered survey documents, and the backdoor payments told a different story. The jury took less than 2 hours to convict them both. Sentencing was swift. Marlene received 5 years with eligibility for parole after 2.5. Victor got 3. Restitution was ordered across the board, and the court appointed a third-party trustee to oversee any future HOA financial decisions, ensuring nothing like this could happen again. The state legislature even cited our case during a session proposing new laws requiring independent audits for HOAs exceeding a certain budget threshold. They called it the Maplewood Reform Bill. I sat on my porch one evening watching the sun dip behind the newly repaired greenbelt fence when Bernard dropped by. He handed me a sealed envelope. "Thought you'd want the original," he said. Inside was the certified survey I'd shown at the meeting all those weeks ago. The one that proved my pool was never in violation. "It's funny," he said, glancing at the edge of the water. "All this started over a pool." I shook my head. "No, it started over power." "The pool was just an excuse," he nodded thoughtfully. "Well, thanks to you, it ended with accountability." I watched him walk away, then turn to the pool. The water was still, reflecting the sky. No more fines, no more threats, just quiet. For the first time in years, Maplewood Ridge felt like home again. And every time I heard the splash of water or the hum of voices from backyard barbecues lining the block, I remembered what it took to get there. Not just a survey, not just evidence, but the decision to say no and never back down.